Ghostlore is about what you'd get if you took Diablo 2 and you set it in Southeast Asia. You begin the game in the middle of the action. You're an apprentice who has to rescue your master. Your master is maybe not so masterful, as he was bested by a quite low-level ghost who's very intent on running away and doesn't seem too bothered about doing much else. But it's still a fairly decent introduction, as it shows you have a long way to go. You have a lot of room for growth, improvement, and, of course, to get stronger. And this is one of the areas where Ghostlore excels. Starting right from the beginning of the game, you have a lot of character customization options. You can start allocating skill points, giving you a toolkit of 4 different skills, which can be further expanded by multiclassing later. And also from very early on, you get access to the game's glyph system. This is another form of passive power accumulation where you get various bonuses by socketing glyphs. This might be something like skill damage, basic attack damage, health. You can further expand these bonuses by combining compound glyphs with regular glyphs. The way this works is you place your compound glyphs on the character sheet, and then you place glyphs in the radius that's illuminated by the compound glyph for additional bonuses. I really like the fact that Ghostlore introduces its character customization right from the start. In fact, by the time you finish the tutorial, you should have a decent number of glyphs and a full set of abilities, which is something that games should do far more often. Now, one small complaint I do have about the glyph system, compound glyphs in particular, there's no real way to tell by just mousing over it what bonuses you get for placing glyphs in the radius. You have to go put it on your character to see what it gives. So it would be really nice to be able to see that, to make it a little bit easier to decide which compound glyphs to use and which ones I can just vendor or store for later. And another aspect where Ghostlore really stands out is the world and the enemy design. Every time you're given a new mission, you go to a new area. And every time you go to a new area, there'll be a few enemies which are familiar, and many more which are completely new and unique. I think there's more diverse enemy design in Ghostlore than there is in New World. And even though the demo and the beta only really focus on the early levels, I never saw enemies that were just copy-pasted and recolored. You don't get the classic kill brown wolves, then kill black wolves, then kill blue wolves. Instead, you're told to kill all sorts of different things, all of which are visually distinct and many of which fight in their own unique ways. And when it comes to the world and the general game atmosphere, there's also a lot of nice little touches, things that weren't really needed, but definitely help the game stand out. For example, there's the weather cycle. Sometimes it'll be raining, and other times it'll be nice and sunny. There's a day-night cycle. As far as I can tell, none of these things have any direct effect on the gameplay, but they're cool little extras that help you get engaged within the world. There's a feeling here that everything's handcrafted, that this is a passion project in the truest sense of a word. The developers aren't just making this because you need a game world in which you kill a bunch of enemies to pick up all the loot. They're crafting a world to share their culture, and that really shows through. This is especially the case when you look through the lore. Both in the bestiary and also with a lot of the recipes from the cooking vendor, there are explanations for the real-life lore behind a lot of these things, which again, while it doesn't necessarily serve a gameplay function, is really cool and helps make the world feel more real. Unfortunately, I didn't find the story as gripping. Most of the story seems to be talk to the scientist lady, get a mission to kill something, and then go back and talk to the scientist lady. But honestly, I just couldn't relate to the fact that she seemed to be doing everything out of spite for getting fired. If you ask me, her boss sucked, and instead of letting him live rent-free in her head, she should probably be doing more productive things with her life, like mastering time travel, or making some super weapons for me to use to destroy more enemies. And personally, I definitely prefer the latter. Now, before I get into the combat in Ghostlore, if you've found this video helpful so far, then do leave a like. Ghostlore has a demo that's completely free on Steam, so if you want to check it out for yourself, be sure to download it, and then let me know down in the comments what you think. And finally, if you want to see more videos like this, or videos on various other topics, then sub to the channel and ring that bell. And now, let's get into Ghostlore's combat, which is where things get a little bit awkward. When I first picked the game up, I messed around with a lot of different classes. I tried the Geomancer, who felt okay. The Geomancer seems to be a wizard archetype, The problem is, you run out of mana and you run out of skill charges relatively quickly. So you're forced to either constantly chug potions, or switch to a melee auto attack. But when I picked a range character, I don't really want to go melee the enemies. I want to be playing farther back. Now, if I'd stuck with a character, I think this would have solved itself eventually, as there's several range weapons that you can pick up, and it appears as if every class can use every weapon. But off the start, it felt awkward, and after beating the tutorial with the Geomancer, I quickly dropped the class and tried something else, which was the Adept. For a while, the Adept also felt better, but as I started fighting tougher enemies, especially bosses, again, I found my frustration with the Adept growing. I was building my Adept as a minion class, and this was a mistake, because the Spectral Swords are really good at killing enemies. Sometimes. Other times, they just kind of waffle around, or they kill small lesser enemies, and ignore the big boss that you need dead. After these frustrations, I was about ready to put the game down. But then, I found the Hissashin class, and I found out that I could play as a walking blender. So tell me, what happens when you put a bunch of demonic boars in a blender? The answer is, you get demonic bacon, and if you eat it, you'll absolutely be cursed. The Hissashin class felt much more well-balanced than the others I'd tried thus far. There's a good mix of ranged abilities and melee abilities. You have a Shroud that lets you run away from fights, or a Dash that lets you get out of tricky situations. And of course, you can spin to win. As we all know, spin to win is objectively the best way to play any action RPG, so this is the best class, and thus I didn't try any of the others. I'm sure they're perfectly fine, but they're not spin, so they don't win. And this is where I get to a lot of Ghostlore's problems. Because even though spinning was very fun, there were times where it seemed to just stutter. I'd stop spinning, and I couldn't really figure out why. I had plenty of mana, and there didn't seem to be any sort of duration to my attack. But nonetheless, I'd stop. And worse yet, I'd stop right in the middle of enemies. Maybe they were stunning me. Maybe they were just so terrifying that my character forgot what he was supposed to be doing. The game didn't really do a very good job of telling me what was going on here. So I can only assume it was a bug? And speaking of bugs, another problem I had is, while I was spinning, I had to be very careful to avoid rocks, because if I spun too far into a rock, I'd get stuck. And if I got stuck, an enemy would probably beat me to death. If I didn't get stuck, well, the enemy might get stuck in the rock, and then I got to beat them to death. It was kind of like shooting fish in a barrel. Very easy, but ultimately rather unsatisfying. On Ghostlore's other classes, I think a lot of the problems stem from the fact that auto attack is on left click, but you move with left click. This could be why so many people were requesting WASD movement, something which I tried for myself and then realized that I couldn't rebind it to arrow keys and promptly gave up. Maybe it's just not labeled correctly, maybe I just somehow missed it, but either way, click to move was totally fine with me, so I didn't look into it too hard. What felt really clunky was walking up to an enemy, then attacking them, and then trying to run away or dodge something, but kinda just still being stuck attacking them. To fix this, what I did is I removed auto attack from left click. Instead, I put it on right click. Now, left click is move, and right click is attack. But where does dodge go? Well, I tried to put dodge on one of my mouse keybinds, and this didn't work. It didn't seem to be able to register the mouse button inputs. So then I just put it on my 2 key, and that was relatively fine. This does mean that you're probably going to be down 1 keybind, which could certainly hurt your late game toolkit, but the game was far more playable with this sort of control scheme, so I'd say it's worth the ability loss. Now, I know this has kind of been a long rant about Ghostlore's combat. This is certainly the area where the game feels lacking, and the area where I think the devs are going to be putting in the most improvement. Even just in the short time where I've had the beta, they've been doing a lot of updates, and they are aware of a lot of these issues. The last issue I found was inconsistent difficulty. The first mission is very easy. Then you fight for Rafflesia, which is one of the hardest bosses that I fought. It summons a lot of adds, it does poison, and after a point, you just fall behind on the DPS checks. Now, maybe I was supposed to reset the area multiple times and grind up a bunch of levels, but nothing in the game really made me feel like I was supposed to be grinding. Instead, I was put in front of a super challenging boss. I was able to overcome it because I could just spam my potions, and I found out that the boss literally couldn't kill me through my potions, but I could easily see this being a point where a new player quits. Quit moments are times where the game's just frustrating, unclear, or in other ways obtuse. Usually, points where the difficulty jumps significantly, without any explanation. And the next time it happened was where I put the game down. Most of the time in my missions, regular enemies didn't do all that much damage. Some of the scarier ones would hit me for a couple hundred, but overall, I knew that bosses would hit hard, bosses are where I have to dodge, and swarms of enemies are where I can just spin. But then, I got into one mission where I'd spin into a pack of enemies, and then just immediately die. As it turned out, they were now hitting for hundreds. They were hitting for about a third of my health each. So all of a sudden, the playstyle that I'd found really fun wasn't feeling very viable. Now, I'm sure I could have respec'd poison daggers. I'm sure I could have switched to a ranged weapon. I could kite enemies away, I could kill them slowly, or maybe I could just go grind levels. But that was the point where the game stopped becoming enjoyable for me. It was another quit moment, and another one that was relatively early on in the game, as all this happened around level 12 or 13. Now, it could be that this is just a beta bug, that the enemies do more damage than they should. It could be I was underleveled, or I'd built my character in some way wrong. I'm not really sure if this is my fault or the game's fault. I'd say probably a bit of both. But at the end of the day, combat is where Ghostlore's kind of let down right now. There's a lot of care being put into the world. But the combat felt very Torchlight 2, and if anyone watched my livestream where I tried to like that game and gave up after a little over an hour, you'd know that's not a good thing. Like, I was fighting against the game's controls more than I was fighting against the enemies on screen. And so I hope this is something that improves in the future, as a lot of the other experiences in the game were well done and enjoyable. So in summary, Ghostlore is a Diablo-like game with a very strong East Asian inspiration. You get good character customization from early on, and a lot of really great systems to build your character around. There's clear care put into the world and the enemies. It shows that this is a place that's lived in, not one that's made just to be background. But unfortunately, combat feels clunky and it's often frustrating, and a few of the game's systems seem outright bugged. I tried to use the blacksmith, and nothing happened. I was able to spend money, and I could see gems being taken out of my inventory, but I wasn't noticing any sort of animation or effect for one of my items being upgraded, and I wasn't able to put an item into the window to upgrade it either. I don't know if I was upgrading something that I just couldn't see, or if nothing was happening at all. But either way, Ghostlore is currently a free demo on Steam. It's something worth keeping an eye on, especially if you enjoyed Path of Diablo or any of those older action RPGs. I can't say for certain if the game will succeed, and I wouldn't necessarily advise buying it in the state that it's in right now. But at the moment, it's still in beta, it hasn't been released, and the developers are still working on things. But I'm definitely going to keep an eye on the game, and hopefully the combat improves. There's a lot to like here. And it's very clear to me that the developers care a lot about their game and the way it represents their culture, so I wish them all the best in the future. But for now, what are your thoughts? What do you think of Ghostlore, and are you going to try the demo? If you do, or if you don't, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, be sure to put them down in the comments below, or join the Discord, where you can ask questions, get build help, and hang out with the community. A special thanks to my patrons and YouTube channel members. They're awesome, and they get to show it by having their name on screen in the credits of all my videos. So if you want to see your name here, be sure to check the link in the description. For more general gaming content, check out my second channel, 10 Gaming Thoughts, and if you want a water bottle or a cool shirt, I have a link to my official merch shop in the description. I hope you learned something today, and I hope to see you again sometime soon.